The Busselton Jetty today is a vibrant tourist attraction and community recreation facility that is enjoyed by many Australians and overseas visitors alike. The jetty owes its very existence to the many thousands of people that have contributed to its existence and upkeep since its inception in 1865. In this short film, we've attempted to document the history of the many highs and lows of this iconic infrastructure. Prior to colonial settlement, the Geographe Bay shoreline was very different, with the edge of the water lapping at what is Marine Terrace today. From around 1790, Geographe Bay was used by American, French and British whaling ships as a safe anchorage and as a place to gather firewood and refill water barrels with fresh water. In 1832, the settlers arrived, taking up land grants, and soon realised they could trade with the whalers. Any part of the beach could be used for landing goods such as molasses, tobacco, clothing, spirits, wooden buckets and barrels that could be traded for butter, meat, potatoes and other produce. At this time in history there were no income taxes and the government relied heavily on the tax gained from imports and exports. There were many ships landing in the bay and thereby avoiding taxes and government charges. In 1851, the need for a jetty in the Busselton region to control this trade was first publicly recognised, and in 1861 action was finally taken when Henry Yelverton was awarded the contract and began by sourcing the required timber from nearby forests. This took quite some time as the selection, felling and transport of the timber to Busselton required manual labour and bullock teams. The jetty was completed at the end of 1865, only 33 years after the settlement of the area. The construction was 161 metres in length. The high tide mark of the jetty would have been situated where the junction of Marine Terrace and Queen Street is today, some 200 metres from the current tide mark. Initially, the tub, a barrel on a pole, served as a beacon up to 1870 when it was replaced with a 20-metre high Jarrah lighthouse. The kerosene lamp projected a light that could be seen for 20 miles seaward. This was demolished in 1933 and replaced with a smaller beacon at the end of the jetty. The jetty required more length for ships which found the waters of Geographe Bay too shallow, and so the first extension was made to the jetty for a cost of £88. We were unable to locate any relevant pictures relating to the jetty between 1875 and 1896. However, records tell us that the continuing silting continued to affect the depth of the water and grow the coastline northwards. In addition, the ever-increasing size of the ships necessitated several increases in the length of the jetty until it was 860 metres long by 1890. During the early years of the jetty's existence, horses were used to pull the wagons of timber and other supplies along the jetty on wooden rails. Tourism began to increase in the late 1880s and the jetty was also used as a stopping point for many passenger ships with an official agreement requesting that they stop for at least 1.5 hours. Thus began Busselton's life as a tourist town. Hotel and other accommodation expanded and the bathing sheds and other beach facilities developed.
On Monday, the 15th of November 1909, a large crowd gathered on the Busselton foreshore to witness the driving of the first pile for the commencement of the railway jetty, or otherwise known as the skeleton jetty. The Mayor of Busselton, my grandfather, George William Barnard Jr., called on the Minister for Works, Frank Wilson, to conduct the formalities. At the conclusion of the formalities, Mr. Wilson called on the Mayor's 8-year-old daughter Marjorie to pull the ribbon which released the monkey, which fell with tremendous force, driving the huge Jarrah pile well into the seabed. Marjorie was presented with a silver replica of that monkey. during the official launch, many of the children enjoyed paddling in the shallows.
In 1911, a further 603 metres was added to the length of the jetty. Of this, the final 168 metres was constructed as a berthing head and widened to 12 metres. At the same time, the harbour was dredged, providing a water depth of 7.6 metres, enabling larger ships to dock. The railway jetty was completed during 1911, and as it was only designed to support the rail lines, it became known as the Skeleton Jetty. It ran from 166 metres east of the existing jetty and joining up with the jetty about 600 metres from the shore. The rail lines were laid and continued from the junction to the berthing head. This enabled steam trains to haul loads of timber, coal and produce out to the ships at the end of the jetty. To guard against fire, each steam train needed a man to walk behind with a bucket of water to douse any hot coals that fell on the timber jetty. It was common practice to pick up bundles of timber from the railway carriages using one central sling. This often resulted in pieces of timber sliding out of the bundle, with many of these being lost in the sea. In those early days, the lumpers' job was quite dangerous as they had no protective gear, mostly worked in very poor light, and if the sea was rough, the ship's derrick would be dangerously jerking the loads to and fro. However, the money was good and the timber industry enjoyed the steady growth over the next 40 years.
The completion of the Skelly Jetty provided a perceived safer swimming area, and this section of the beach soon became very popular for family outings. This promoted the construction of a wooden fence that was built between the two jetties and back along each to the shore, providing a safe swimming area for the public. It was secure against the intrusion of sharks and other sea monsters. The fence proved to be a great spot for the Smith brothers, who were professional fishermen, and the grand old man in the background was my great-grandfather, George William Barnard Sr.
A photo of the swimming competition displays spectators in interesting dress for such an occasion. These events drew quite large crowds and many participants. Although the wooden fence was a great idea, the variation in the wind and waves soon began to demolish the fence, and within 20 years there was very little left of it. Busselton was soon recognised as one of the leading holiday and health resorts in the state due to its picturesque beaches, proximity to amazing caves and temperate weather. The timber industry began to boom, and so did the tourism sector. To cater for the jetty's function as an attraction, social amenities were also added. A pavilion was constructed on the jetty and was used for band concerts and other activities.
In 1968, the Busselton Council gave the Busselton JCs approval to build an oceanarium just behind the changing rooms midway between the two jetties. When the site had been surveyed and prepared, the steel panels from a donated squatter's tank were lifted into place and bolted together with curved angle iron reinforcing the outside for added strength. Take notice of the safety boots and protective gear they all wore. Today's health and safety people would have a fit, especially with the kids mingling with the workers. The completed tank measured 30 feet in diameter with 6-foot high walls. As it no longer had a bottom, it was decided to install a large plastic pool liner with a clear plastic insert for half the circumference, so the glass windows would give patrons underwater viewing of the fish. A raised boardwalk was to be built around the other half of the tank so people could look down on the fish. A trench was dug across the beach to the shore end of the swimming jetty, and a pipeline laid out to the end of that jetty. A 3-inch pump ran continuously to ensure a good supply of clean seawater, and the overflow was returned to the ocean. The final step was the installation of a pool liner, followed by turning on the pump and filling the tank to the overflow. With the oceanarium complete, regular fishing trips provided a good stock of local sharks, stingrays and small fish. The JC's Oceanarium raised tens of thousands of dollars for local charities over its lifetime, and it was the catalyst that spawned the current underwater observatory that exists today.
Over its 107-year working life, the jetty serviced approximately 5,000 ships and contributed greatly to the development of the southwest. Around this time, a 6-metre white pointer shark terrorised the bay for a few days before being caught within 500 metres east of the jetty by Snowy Peak. I'm sure this excitement helped the patronage of the Busselton Apex Club's jetty tours. The club had ingeniously converted a mini moke to run on the rail tracks. This early version of the train ran for several years.
The next morning we were shocked to see the damage that had been caused. In particular, several sections of the pedestrian jetty had been washed away. It transpired that when the jetty had been maintained, they had used shorter piles, and the large waves of Albury just picked the jetty sections up and washed them onto the beach and the skeleton jetty. As another major storm was predicted, there was an urgency to clean up the debris that had been washed against the skeleton jetty to prevent further damage. The Busselton JCs went out into the community seeking volunteers to assist in the clean-up. We were extremely pleased to have 600 people turn up out of a population of 3,800 people, complete with over 60 pieces of heavy machinery. As we were about to start, the Busselton Council decided we had no insurance, so we could not proceed. Luckily, one of our members represented South British Insurance and was able to get in touch with the senior underwriter at his home in Sydney. They donated the insurance and were able to carry on. The Busselton JCs organised 2 food vans to provide coffee and food over the 2-day clean-up, and a lot of fun was had by all who attended. Resulting from the overwhelming community support, the Save the Jetty Committee was formed, spurred on by the knowledge that the government and the local council were seriously considering demolishing the entire jetty. The committee operated from the office of Doug Wynne, who was his staff and contacts made a great contribution. He was a member of the WA Legislative Council in the Southwest. It took 8 years of petitioning and hard work to get the council and the government to allow us to take over the jetty and prevent its demolition. At this point, the council formed a committee and I was asked to be treasurer. I agreed, providing the committee would be allowed to operate as a private company without local government restrictions. As the council really didn't want to manage the jetty, they readily agreed to our proposal. This has continued to this day, and we're now one of the biggest and most successful businesses in the district. The government had allocated $500,000 to demolish the jetty, so they agreed to provide us with $500,000, and the committee were required to complete urgent restoration work costing $750,000. The Rural Industry Bank provided us with an interest-free loan of $250,000 to complete the necessary repairs. The loan was guaranteed by a number of local businesses. By running multiple events, we managed to repay the loan within 2 years. We were finally allowed to charge visitors an entrance fee of 10 cents, operating from a caravan. Over the years, with the addition of the train rides, underwater observatory and many other facilities, the Busselton Jetty Volunteer Management is now one of the biggest businesses in Busselton, turning over millions each year with about 50 full-time employees and a large contingent of volunteers. It should be noted that a percentage of the profits each year is paid into a 50-year maintenance fund, which is administered by the council, minimising future ratepayer liability.
The concrete decking slabs were precast onshore at the jetty site and stacked to cure, ready for installation on the steel trusses. I first started working on the Busselton Jetty in late 1989 as a Busselton Shire Council bridge carpenter to cut and tenon the piles which had already been driven by the contractors who were progressively working towards the shore end of the section. This first section of the jetty reconstruction of approximately 240 metres removed the original wide section known as the second head. Once all the piles had been driven and the demolition of the old structure and fitting of new timbers and steel trusses with concrete deck panels could begin. This section of the new jetty was officially opened by the Honourable David Smith, Minister for the South West, on the 28th of March 1990. Another job was to repair the burnt section at 309. A fire had occurred in the mid-1980s before the Shire was handed the jetty maintenance from the Public Works Department. The first job was to remove the rail lines, but the only access to the north end of the job was along the curb, about 200mm wide on the left side. I carried an e-bottle of oxygen along this timber to the other side, then asked for the acetylene bottle to be brought over. Reply from the two guys was,
"If you want the bloody thing, you come and get it."
After several scary trips back and forth, I was able to cut the two rails and had them dragged out of the way. We then manoeuvred a 15-metre jarrah pile into the damaged section and decked over this area. We then erected a tripod at either end of the smaller burnt section and constructed ourselves an old-fashioned flying fox. This enabled us to fit timbers salvaged from our Section 4 work. With new decking and handrail, the job was completed and safe access to the jetty end was achieved in May 1991.
No, Kevin, the boat's too small for the Bobcat. A small train service commenced operation on the jetty railway line that had previously been used to transport cargo. For a fee, the train service accommodated up to 40 passengers per trip and took them to the end of the jetty and back. This service provided access for disabled persons, mobility impaired, and provided storage for diving enthusiasts. Training new drivers didn't always go to plan and occasionally presented unique recovery problems.
At 2 p.m. on Sunday, the 12th of December 99, I was notified that there was a fire burning about 100 metres from the end of the jetty. I grabbed the only firefighting gear we had, a bike, a bucket and a rope. I arrived at the fire and found it was burning across the full width of the jetty, fanned by a strong east wind. There was nothing I could do with the bucket, so I raced back along the jetty to get a small pump and call for additional help. I loaded a small maintenance rail trolley with the small pump, chainsaw and other gear and raced back to the fire, which by then had really got going. I began fighting the fire, then cutting off the burning timber to stop the fire moving any closer to shore. Help soon arrived, together with a volunteer sea rescue boat and a private fishing boat, both with small pumps. The strong wind prevented the boats getting too close to the fire. It wasn't until the larger fire pump from Bunbury arrived on a ferry operator's vessel and one of the volunteer firemen was able to access the northern end, enabling them to fight the fire on that section, bringing it under control. Over 12 hours of hard work by all, we saved the last 150 metres of the jetty. Over the next few days, an assessment of the damage was completed by a group headed by the Shire CO Michael Swift and the Jetty Preservation Committee President Ali Scott, resulting in the fact that the jetty structure was well underinsured.
During 1999, it was decided to build an interpretive centre, and Busselton architects Joseph D'Agostino and Stuart Luff were commissioned to design the centre to encompass a cultural heritage museum and retail shop. The building had to be designed to withstand the full forces of nature, and the architects used fibre cement products to create the centre's weatherboard look and stand up to the elements. The function of this facility is to create a learning environment so visitors and locals alike can appreciate the long and colourful history of the jetty and highlight the richness of the marine environment. The fire of 1999 highlighted the need for a method of raising large funds to be funneled back into the jetty. The idea of an underwater observatory was warmed to, and a concrete and steel structure 13 metres deep and 8.5 metres wide was constructed in Geographe Bay. It has 11 viewing windows and weighs 550 tonnes. In March 2003, it was towed down to its current location on the Busselton Jetty. It was then sunk and anchored to the seabed in preparation for opening to the public in the spring. The creation of a 3.6 million attraction is testament to the quality of the underwater viewing beneath the jetty, with over 300 known marine species that live beneath. The underwater observatory opened to the public in December 2003 and over 60,000 people visited in the first 6 months. The Busselton Jetty swim was started by Max Higgins in 1996. 82 people participated that year. The full swim is 3.6 kilometres around the iconic Busselton Jetty, and at the time this documentary was produced, it now attracts over 5,000 participants. As a result of storm damage in July 2004, the Busselton Shire Council did a structural assessment in July of 2005 and found that major parts of the jetty required work. In November 2008, $24 million was awarded for the jetty refurbishment by a coalition of the Liberal and National state governments, to be administered by the South West Development Commission. In addition, $2.1 million from Busselton Shire and $1 million from the Busselton Jetty management, providing a total of $27.1 million. The design for the project required approximately 200 timber piles and 108 steel piles to be driven to support the new structure. A new jetty 4 metres wide was constructed immediately west of the existing skeleton jetty up to the old junction. Timber piles with a timber deck at the interpretive centre were specified by the WA Heritage Commission. The contractors, Marine and Civil, commenced the project in early May 2009, with many aspects of the work completed and 224 piles driven by March 2010. Work was 85% completed by early November in 2010, when Marine and Civil announced voluntary administration of their company. Work resumed on the 15th of December 2010, with the Busselton Shire appointing their own project manager, Steve Disley. A new piling barge operator and other contractors were employed to complete the project. Over the years, there have been many quiet achievers, and one of these was Roy Morris, who spent his childhood fishing and playing on the jetty. Later, he worked as a wharfie, servicing the visiting ships, and throughout his life he contributed to the preservation of the jetty. The main jetty with access to the underwater observatory was opened by the then Premier Mr Colin Barnett on the 5th of February 2011. The jetty north of the observatory and other works were completed and handed over in June 2012. The celebrations for the jetty's 150th were held during 2015.